The FanGraphs top 50 free agents list is out, and we've got contract predictions for all of the top players. We'll discuss what those predictions are and if they're a fit for the Giants next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, the first of the three major publications that I really look forward to every year putting out their top 50 free agents lists. It's not just ranking the free agents. They are predicting what the contract is ultimately going to be. You know, we have our own thoughts. I've talked about this from time to time, what these guys will end up getting. But when at FanGraphs, MLB Trade Rumors, and ESPN specifically, they're also talking to people in the industry. There's a lot of connections there, and a lot of former writers go on to work, especially with FanGraphs and ESPN as well, for teams. And so, having that connection and getting a good sense for what these deals ultimately will be really helps us understand what we're looking at when we talk about these players. And so, without really any further delay, let's just jump into the list. This is mostly done over at FanGraphs by Ben Clemens, a writer there, but a bunch of the top writers there kind of chip in and help here. So we're also going to discuss the crowdsource. This is where anyone who's a reader of FanGraphs could predict what the contracts are going to be for all of these players, and then they average it, and they also find the median. And so we'll discuss all of that. And coming in at number one as the top free agent, according to FanGraphs, is Aaron Judge. Not a huge surprise there. And the total money that FanGraphs predicts will go to Aaron Judge is $315 million over 9 years, which is $35 million a year. The median crowdsourced estimate or prediction is 8 years, $300 million. And this is exactly actually what I put in when I did my own contribution to the crowdsourcing here, because, a nice round number, he gets to that $300 million total. And the average annual value in that case is $37.5 million. And so I happen to think that's a somewhat optimistic number for Aaron Judge, kind of like not a best case scenario, but a, 75th percentile, 90th percentile, 80th percentile outcome for Aaron Judge. Clearly the ultimate Ben Clemens prediction, he was the one, again, who ultimately made the calls on the official FanGraphs prediction. He has Judge getting a little more, $315, but it comes at the cost of an extra year, not a higher average annual value over fewer years, or the same as the crowdsourced years. So anyway, I think that we're looking at 7, 8, 9 years. I think teams, including the Giants, would probably prefer 6. If you go 6 or 7, the AAV in theory goes up versus when you go 8 or 9. But ultimately, I think Judge will be able to come away with something around 8 years and $300 million. And so, as much as I love Aaron Judge, I do continue to have some concerns about a deal that is 8 or even especially 9 years long when he's going to be 31 in year one. So this means if it's a 9-year deal, he would be 39 in the last year of a deal. And I'm just thinking that would not be a great outcome. So, towards the end. But ultimately, would I be upset at all if the Giants signed him to one of these deals? Absolutely not. And in fact, over my shoulder here on my left, it says Aaron Judge season. And so, yeah, I'm following this closely from a almost fan standpoint of wanting the Giants to bring in somebody big, and Aaron Judge makes, he's the best one of all of these guys, given current value, I think. But given that he's a little older than some other guys, towards the end, it's worse value. But right now, it might be the best. So coming in at number 2, according to FanGraphs on this list, is Trea Turner, who they predict will get 9 years, $288 million. That's $32 million a year. I think that around $30 million a year makes a lot of sense and will probably be where he lands. And so right away you can see that the Judge season that he just had kind of boosts him to a level far beyond. Like the second best player is coming in at $32 million a year on this prediction, and Judge came in at, I guess Ben Clemens said 35, but the crowdsource said $37.5 million a year, and the median crowdsource for Trea Turner is $30 million a year. So $7.5 million more per year that for Aaron Judge versus the next best player. And I'm not sure that that is like an accurate portrayal of the true value, and is more so just kind of the hype around Aaron Judge. And so it'll be interesting to see where these ultimately come in. I mean, Trea Turner, it's not like there's a enormous drop off necessarily. It may end up ultimately being similar value, and yet the prediction here, the median crowdsource is 7 years, $210 million. And the average crowdsource is 7.28 years at $217 million. And for Judge, I'm not sure I mentioned the average crowdsource, 7.9 years at $37.2 million per year, which comes out to $294 million. So anyway, for Turner, the readers are suggesting, somewhere around 200 million, and Ben Clemens of FanGraphs is suggesting more like 300 million, and that it comes in the form of a couple extra years for Trea Turner. So I think the Giants will be interested in Trea Turner. I think they'll pursue Trea Turner. I don't think that they'll give him a 9-year deal. He will be age 30 in year one. He's actually right on the cutoff. He'll be 29 for the first few months of 2023, and then he'll turn 30 in late June. So anyway, I mean, listen, I must say at this juncture, I thought that last year, no offense to Ben Clemens of FanGraphs, I think he does great work, but overall, the contract predictions I found were more realistic coming out of ESPN and MLB Trade Rumors, and that Ben Clemens at FanGraphs, his were a little bit less less accurate in terms of what I expected. And then I even tracked it throughout the process of the offseason and graded like which source had the best predictions. And I think FanGraphs was a distant third. And so take these with a grain of salt. They're pretty good, but I think when the other sources come out, I'll be a little more interested to see what those have to say. And I also think the crowdsourcing may end up being a little bit more accurate than the one person's prediction. So with that said, moving on to number 3 on the list, it is Carlos Correa. He may be, like I said the other day when we looked at who's the free agent shortstop of these 4, Correa, Turner, Bogaerts, and Swanson, that I would recommend to the Giants. And I said Correa. So what is that contract going to be for Carlos Correa? What does FanGraphs have to say? We'll get into it in just a minute. But before we do, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Just today, they sent out the latest odds for Aaron Judge and a bunch of other free agents. And something that I tweeted out immediately is that they have the over-under on Aaron Judge's next contract, which we just literally discussed today, at $375 million as the over-under. And so I would encourage anyone who can do so to check that out and perhaps bet the under on that, because to me, that's a pretty clear miscalculation of the market. I think that it'll be significantly less than $375 million. At the very least, $375 million is like the 99th percentile outcome for Aaron Judge. And so it's not a great number to set an over-under on at. And so I would definitely take the under on $375 million. And once again, the Giants, per BetOnline, come in as the favorites to sign Aaron Judge if he leaves New York, leaves the Yankees, that is. So you can check all of this out for yourself. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, as promised, we're going to continue running through these FanGraphs predictions. Carlos Correa, as I said, I recommended him above all these other shortstops, and we're going to talk about what the predicted contract is going to be. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. So yes, the prediction for Carlos Correa, according to Ben Clemens of FanGraphs, 10 years, $300 million. And this one I can see. This one I can see, even though he's coming in above the crowdsourced numbers. Median crowdsourced is 8 years, $256 million. And the average, is 7.78 years at $32.2 million per year. So the range here is 32 million per year, but Ben Clemens is coming in a little lower on the low end at 30 versus the 32 for the median crowdsource. But he's adding a couple years, and so that makes sense. When you add a couple years, the AAV is going to come down a little. And so I could see Correa ultimately getting 10 years, $300 million. The big deal is that he's 28. He's going to be 28 in all of year one of a deal. And so that makes him very attractive. Like I don't necessarily agree with the crowdsourcing that he only gets 8 years. Like if Judge can get 8 years and he's going to be 31 in year one of a deal, how come Correa is only getting 8 years? I think 10 makes sense. I could see a team. I could see the Giants. 10, $300 million. It's a nice, tidy, clean number. It's exactly what Manny Machado got back in the day. It was several off seasons ago now. And Machado was 26 at the time, so it's not apples to apples per se, but inflation has happened. Correa is very good. I could definitely see 10, 300, boom, done being the final deal for Correa. And certainly if it's 8 years, $256 million or something, I would think the Giants should be all over that. That would be a solid deal for a player of this caliber. I like him a lot. That's the first one. Judge is just attractive because he's the top player and there's the Giants connections. And so that one has me drooling a little bit when I look at it. But then Correa is the one I look at as the most kind of attractive one we've looked at besides Judge. Next player here is Jacob deGrom, coming in as the number 4 player on this list. And this one gets a little bonkers. And this is where I scratch my head a little bit when I look at I don't think that MLB Trade Rumors or ESPN will have this kind of number for deGrom. The prediction here is 3 years, $141 million. That's $47 million per year. Just blowing out of the water what Max Scherzer got last offseason, which was blowing other deals out of the water. So what Ben Clemens is predicting here is that we had like a earth-shattering deal for Scherzer, and now we're going to have a earth-shattering deal that shatters Scherzer's deal for deGrom. And the reason I don't see this happening is because deGrom has not been able to stay healthy, and Scherzer kind of had. And so for deGrom, I mean, if we look at the last few years, last year, I mean, in 2022, he only pitched 64 and a third innings. In 2021, he only pitched 92 innings. And so while the innings are upper tier, like you just are not guaranteeing yourself health when you're talking about Jacob deGrom at all. And this is paying him like as if he was the best pitcher in the game and he was going to make all his starts. That's kind of how I look at this number. And so the crowdsource number, 3 years, 120 million, which is 40 million a year. That's still a lot of money to spend on a starting pitcher who has had serious injury issues throughout his the last many years and has been super good. The thing is, he's also 35. He's going to be 35 in June. And so that's why it's a short term. The injury risk is also why it's a short term. But I mean, I just don't see 47 million. I could see him possibly getting 3 years, 120, but maybe it's 2 years plus a third year option for a team or something, because there's just a ton of risk here with a 3-year deal for that kind of money for a guy who's just so, you're not sure how many innings you're going to get. So I think the Giants will be interested in a Jacob deGrom, especially if they don't bring back Carlos Rodón. I mean, pretty much only if they bring back Carlos Rodón, you can kind of forget about these other starters, I think. But if they don't bring back Rodón, then it is deGrom and it is the next guy, Justin Verlander, coming in at number 5, who makes the next most sense. Maybe the first most sense. Maybe these guys make more sense than bringing in deGrom or in bringing back Rodón because of the short term, and the team has valued short term deals. So coming in at number 5, Justin Verlander. Ben Clemens predicts 2 years, 80 million. And I see like that's way more realistic to me. I don't see why deGrom is getting 7 million more per year and an extra year. That doesn't make sense to me. So, I mean, I get it. Verlander is 40. He's going to be 40 next year. But that explains getting one fewer year. So, yeah, Verlander turns 40 in February. And the difference is, though, that Verlander, he pitched 175 innings this year. And so he's proved that he's healthy. He pitched into the World Series, so he's healthy currently. And deGrom, there's just less certainty for me. Maybe I'm misreading the market, but I don't know. I think 40 million a year for each of these guys makes sense, and maybe give an extra year to deGrom. The median crowd source for Verlander is just 2 years, 70 million. So 35 million a year. So I could see somewhere in between 37 and a half, 37, 38, even 40. For Verlander, I think this is more attractive than what is predicted for deGrom. I'd rather have Verlander for 2 years, 80 million, than deGrom for 3 years, 141 million. But again, these guys make sense if Rodon isn't brought back, and that may be what they prefer because you could go 2 years for a Verlander versus 5, 6 for a Rodon. Anyway, the next player on the list is Xander Bogaerts, another shortstop. Note that we've already had Trea Turner, we've already had Carlos Correa, and now we have Bogaerts. So three of the top 6 overall players, according to FanGraphs so far, are shortstops. And that's why when we're talking about what are the Giants going to do, we're talking about shortstops because the best players are shortstops, many of the best players. So the Ben Clemens FanGraphs prediction is 7 years, $217 million. That's $31 million per year. I think it's a little much. I think it's somewhat close, but ultimately, I think the crowdsourced guess 6 years, $28 million per year. So 6 years, $168. I think that's a little low. So maybe he gets that 7th year, but maybe it's at $28 million a year. I don't know. I mean, 6 years would be preferred, certainly from a team perspective, but Bogaerts is obviously going to try to maximize. I don't love this one. I think there are some red flags with historical defense hasn't been great. It was good in 2022, apparently, but it wasn't great in like all the years before that. And the expected numbers based on like quality of contact weren't nearly as good as the actual numbers. The dude can hit, but I wouldn't love giving out a $200 million contract to Xander Bogaerts, given that you're paying for the back end of his career instead of what he's already done. Really like the player. This is like a fine prediction, but it's not something I'd be thrilled about. I'd much rather give, a little bit more to Carlos Correa. It's not a little bit, like 83 million more to Carlos Correa over 3 more years. I don't know. I guess maybe these are reasonable, but I just prefer Correa. So coming up next, guess who it is? Carlos Rodon. We'll get to that prediction in just a minute, but first. All right, as promised, we're going to keep running through this, hopefully get through the top 10. Number 7 here, according to FanGraphs, is Carlos Rodon, and the prediction is for 5 years, $120 million. It's just like very reasonable, exactly what we expect. I honestly think in this case, they may be underselling him a bit. The median crowd source is 5 years, $135 million. So same number of years, $15 million more total, which is $3 million more per year. And I think his season was that good. Like when we look at Kevin Gausman and the season he had, like these are based on the last several years. Like the best pitchers have been getting 5 years around 110, 120 million, including Kevin Gausman, including Robbie Ray, Joe Musgrove, and an extension right before reaching free agency. So it's been pretty common, and they're just saying Rodon is going to do the same thing. I think these are both reasonable. Maybe call it 25 million a year over 5 years. Can he get a 6th year? Maybe he'll try. But I would ultimately expect this is pretty much exactly what he ends up getting. Just like with Kevin Gausman last year, when I was saying I think they will bring him back, I think they should bring him back, I certainly stressed that 5-year deals for pitchers often don't work out well. And we even spent time like going back 5 years and looking at specifically like MLB trade rumors. Who did they say were the top 5 pitchers from 5 off seasons ago? And it's amazing the names that you find on these lists. It's like, what? That guy? For example, Dallas Keuchel was a guy who was getting close to $100 million, and now he's just one of the worst pitchers in the game, struggles to find a team, gets lit up every time he goes out there. So, yeah, just by way of example. And that's why I personally said I didn't love Marcus Stroman last winter. I thought that he reminded me a lot of Keuchel. He's just not a strikeout guy, kind of relies on pinpoint control maybe. So, I don't know, but the big power arms, maybe they can age well. Maybe fastball decline is a problem. I don't know. We'll see. But I thought Gausman made sense, and they apparently didn't even make him an offer. So I think that Rodon very, very well could end up on another team. Coming in at number 8. So here's our last shortstop. So 4 of the top 8, according to FanGraphs, are shortstops. And Ben Clemens of FanGraphs predicts for Dansby Swanson, 6 years, $144 million. The median crowdsource is 6 years, $141 million. The average crowdsource, 6.03 years, $139 million. So it seems like there's consensus here between Clemens and the fans, or the crowd, at 6 years, $140-ish million. And I think that makes sense. Note that that's a significant drop-off from the Trea Turner, Carlos Correa, and Xander Bogaerts predictions. And so that makes sense to me. Swanson is like a defense and speed-oriented player, and the bat is a little bit less certain, and certainly not as good as the other 3 shortstops. So this is like a solid fallback option, but he wouldn't be per se the guy I would be thrilled about the most, especially because then, like we talk about, okay, someone would have to move positions for Crawford. Well, in Swanson's case, you don't want him moving positions because so much of his value comes from being good defensively at short. So then it's Crawford who's moving positions, and I think that Crawford at another position doesn't really play because he doesn't hit enough to kind of play some of these more offense-oriented positions. So we talk about there being an issue with signing a shortstop because Crawford's already on the roster. I only really see that issue crop up with Swanson. Any of the other 3, Turner, Correa, and Bogaerts, I could see them shifting positions for a year and it would be fine because they hit enough to play another position. But neither Swanson or Crawford necessarily do. Anyway, the next player, Brandon Nimmo. I might have this guy a little bit higher than some others who have been ahead of him, maybe one other perhaps, but the prediction here per Ben Clemens of FanGraphs, 5 years, $110 million. Average crowdsource, 5 years, $100 million. So that's exactly what I've been expecting, about $20 million a year. I think this may legitimately be one of the better values when we go through these lists and look at what has he done the last several years, and specifically like when he's been on the field, how has he produced? He does everything the Giants like and then some. He hits like they like. He's super patient, doesn't chase out of the zone. He's fast. He plays good defense in the outfield. He doesn't have platoon splits. Like, I really like the player Brandon Nimmo, and this is like a really good value compared to some of the guys above him where I've said, what? Like, I'd rather have this contract than the one. I think that he can be as good as Xander Bogaerts, and yet the prediction for Bogaerts was like double the total commitment. So it doesn't necessarily make the most sense. A lot of it is durability. He hasn't played all that much the last few years. This year he was very healthy, but he wasn't the last couple years. I don't know exactly what was going on, and I keep saying I'm going to look, and I haven't yet, but I like the value here at about 5 years, $110 million. That would be a nice deal. And he's not Judge, he's not Correa, but he's a very, very fine player. And in fact, he may even be, he has been as good as Correa when he's been on the field the last few years. Like per plate appearance, he's been just as good. So the next player, number 10, is Willson Contreras. And the prediction here is for 4 years, $80 million, $20 million a year. The median crowdsource is 4 years, $70.6 million, $17.7 million a year. And again, I think this is a pretty solid value. I keep meaning to say this, and I'm not sure I have. Part of the appeal to me of Willson Contreras, who's a catcher, by the way, is that we very well may end up seeing an automated strike zone starting in 2024. And so the biggest knock on Contreras' game is his pitch framing. But if pitch framing becomes less important, which it very well may, and every year after year one of a deal, then he becomes even more valuable to me. It's also possible he becomes less valuable because teams might shift offensive players to the catcher position if framing is less important. But we could do a whole episode on that topic. But basically, the Giants are kind of unsettled at the catcher position. I get that they have Bart. Austin Wynns actually did a pretty nice job for them. But Willson Contreras is one of the better catchers in the game, and you could instantly upgrade at a position where you haven't been great, or at least weren't great in 2022. But it would create complications and open up trade possibilities with Bart and all this stuff. So it would be complicated, but low key, this is a possible fit, and I think it is a solid value with what you're getting for this kind of money versus some of the other predictions. So anyway, that was the top 10. I can't wait to look through the rest of these. I'm not going to go through one by one every day for the rest of them, but certainly we're going to talk about who are some of the better values, and we'll get into when MLB Trade Rumors does their list, when ESPN does their list, and we'll cross compare and kind of find the average of all these predictions to get the best possible predictions we can ahead of the official opening of real true free agency on Thursday. So thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's like the sports page of old, but now in podcast form with the unique insights of the local experts on the biggest stories. It's really great, so check it out. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.